Bob was furious. His date had stood him up. She was supposed to meet him at the opening of the refurbished museum. They had connected just 2 days earlier at a bar, and Bob had felt optimistic about their chemistry. Now, it seemed his luck with women was as dismal as ever. As he wandered the nearly empty museum, resisting his usual despair, he lost himself in the unfamiliar surroundings. Near closing time, only a few people lingered. In frustration, he knocked on a door marked "Restricted Access," hoping someone inside could direct him to an exit. When no one responded, he tried the handle and was surprised when it turned easily. Calling out as he stepped inside, he was met with silence. A bit uneasy, he ventured further into the room, observing the exhibits that appeared to be in disarray. Perhaps this was where they prepared the displays. Something seemed to beckon him, and as he followed that feeling, he stopped in awe. In the corner stood a stunning woman, perfectly still. As he approached, he realized she was depicted on the lid of a mummy case. Her beauty was striking. He couldn't help but trace the contours of the lid with his fingers. Compelled by an inexplicable urge, he opened the lid, only to find it empty. Disappointment washed over him, and just as he was about to close it, he heard footsteps approaching. Panic set in. Not only was he trespassing, but he had disturbed an exhibit. He frantically searched for a place to hide. The open mummy case seemed to call to him. On impulse, he squeezed inside, pulling the lid shut with just enough space for air, grateful for his slender build. The door opened, and voices filled the room. "Look at this beauty," one voice said. "It just arrived yesterday." "We were fortunate to catalog its unique properties," another replied. Bob held his breath, hoping they wouldn't examine it like he had. Then dread washed over him as he heard one of them say, "Let's set it back on this trolley, and I'll get one of the guys to bring it into the examination room tomorrow. Be careful not to damage it, you might get cursed." Bob's heart raced. "A curse?" came the anxious reply. "I don't know much about it, but there were mentions of it being able to change your body." "I wouldn't worry too much, they likely exaggerated the inscriptions." "Don't all mummy cases come with their own tales of curses?" Bob had no time to ponder the implications of a curse as he felt the case tilt back. With a sudden click, the lid closed fully over him, muffling the voices outside. He debated whether to call out or wait before trying to escape, but it was too late. The men had already left. Trapped, he found no way to release himself from the inside. The tight confines left him little leverage to force it open. As the air grew thin, he struggled to breathe. Gradually, as his oxygen-deprived mind began to fade, he became aware of a voice calling him, a woman's voice. He sensed it more than heard it. Focusing on it, his panic subsided, and he slipped into unconsciousness. His last coherent thought was a wondering if it was the ghost of the original occupant beckoning him to join her. He woke up, disoriented, trying to figure out where he was and what time it was. The shadow of the half-built pyramid shielded him from the late afternoon sun, its rays stretching across the scorching desert. Clearly, he was far from home. He realized he was moving, but it felt wrong to say he was walking. It was more like she was walking. She? To his astonishment, he seemed to be inhabiting a woman's body. No, it was more like he was a passenger in her mind. He could see, hear, and feel through her senses, yet had no control over her actions. She spoke in a language he didn't recognize, and though he wasn't particularly knowledgeable about linguistics, he guessed it might be Arabic. Another strange observation was the noticeable pause between her thoughts and her words, as if she was translating her ideas into speech. He could pick up on fragments of her thoughts, which clearly weren't from any earthly language. Her next words confirmed this. "But Krith, we didn't come all this way from Omicron 4 just to fail now. We need to activate Plan Cronus." "I know, Lyra. We took a chance coming here. Unfortunately, we only had one opportunity. This world is in danger. It's unfortunate that this is the most technologically advanced culture available at this time," the woman said. "You realize the sacrifice you'll be making if you proceed with the plan?" It will take centuries before the technology that sent those signals to us is developed. Finding a suitable candidate could take even longer, and time is not on our side. Of course, Krith, but hopefully a candidate will appear who fits the criteria within the necessary timeframe. Then I will live again, even if only as a guide, Lyra responded. Well, if we're going to do this, we'd better start now before the ship loses all power, Krith said. What will you do after the ship has finished reverting? The man sighed. I guess we'll try to blend in with the locals and offer any assistance we can. Maybe we can initiate the process of advancing their knowledge. The orb? It may be needed in the future, and I can't risk losing it. Don't worry, my daughter. I'll place it in a stasis field. You'll know where it is and what to do with it. We will have aligned the resonators in the pyramids perfectly, he added, glancing up at the unfinished pyramid. Bob then saw a rapid sequence of scenes, the two of them entering a ravine that concealed what could only be a spacecraft. The scenes flickered as if fast-forwarded. One showed a machine directing a device at the unconscious woman. The final scene was peculiar, with only the mummy case in view. It bore the exact likeness of the woman, but she was nowhere to be found. Bob felt darkness envelop him again as his consciousness faded. What the hell? A voice exclaimed. Bob jolted awake, hearing the shocked yell of a museum worker as the lid of the case opened. A man stared at him, his face a mask of disbelief. As Bob moved, the man paled, frozen in shock at the sight of someone emerging from the case. Bob began to apologize, realizing he was in serious trouble, but stopped short at the sound of his own melodious voice, just like the woman in his dream. As he climbed out of the mummy case, he noticed more changes. His shirt stretched tightly across his chest, and he felt what could only be breasts beneath it. He jumped out of the case, quickly realizing that he was indeed a woman beneath the male clothing. The outfit felt awkward and ill-fitting on his transformed body, and he could sense the man's astonishment beside him. You're her. I mean, the woman who, from the case, how could? The man stammered. Bob just wanted to escape and understand what had happened to his body. He ran to the door, yanking it open with a ripping sound that revealed it had been locked. No longer, it swung wildly on its last hinge as Bob dashed through without a moment's pause. He was out and sprinting down the corridor before the man had time to process what had just happened. As Bob ran, his mind raced. How did I damage that door, he thought. If I'm a woman now, I shouldn't have been able to do that, especially not as a man. Passing a darkened display case, he paused in wonder. Now I see why that man was so shocked, Bob realized. I'm the spitting image of the woman on the lid of the mummy's case. How is this possible? Making her way toward the exit, she realized it must be the next day as the morning sun streamed through the museum's windows. Bob paused near the main doors, wondering if they were still locked. Suddenly, a shout from behind jolted her into action as a lean security guard hurried toward her, speaking into a walkie-talkie. Deciding she needed to get out of there, she took off running. As she stiff-armed the solid door, she was shocked not only to see it swing open but to watch it come completely off its hinges, flying several yards down the steps. Bob dashed down the stairs, taking them 4 at a time, leaving the security guard trailing in her wake. As she ran, she marveled at the strength of her new body. She felt as if she were hardly exerting herself. Once at the car, she quickly unlocked the door and squealed the tires in her rush to get home. Glancing at her new face in the rearview mirror, she nearly ran a red light, captivated by the reflection that met her gaze. The delicate features were framed by a cascade of honeygold hair with reddish highlights that shimmered as it moved. Her clear blue eyes, framed by long dark lashes beneath high-arched eyebrows, seemed to invite anyone to get lost in them. Her lips glistened as if freshly coated in lipstick. The overall appearance was mesmerizing, and Bob found himself falling in love with it. Upon arriving home, the first thing Bob wanted to do was strip off and examine this new body closely. Standing naked in front of the mirror, he was astonished. His old body was nowhere to be found. Instead, the girl staring back at him was breathtaking. Her long legs were perfectly proportioned, showing no evidence of the strength that had allowed her to evade the guard. Looking at her arms and hands, he noticed no bruises, yet the strength hidden within was disguised by seemingly ordinary slender limbs. Deciding to embrace her new gender, she assessed her figure. Her breasts were ample but not overly large, and her waist flowed into hips that felt wider and more padded than she had imagined. Trying to avoid dwelling on her new anatomy, she sat on the bed, not wanting the distraction while she contemplated how all this had happened. The girl from the past had clearly played a significant role in her transformation. She couldn't pinpoint the mechanics of it, but that ray must have been the key. Perhaps it had infused the case with her essence. It was evident she was unlike anyone else on Earth. Maybe the woman possessed some sort of superpower that allowed her to change forms or transform others. A sudden chill crept over Bob as he wondered if she was, in fact, a kind of parasite, living through others and altering them to her own design. Searching her mind, Bob found no thoughts other than her own. Maybe the connection had failed. It was a long time ago, hopefully, too long. She tried not to feel guilty about that thought, recalling the words from her dream about the world being in danger. Perhaps that danger had passed, but the nagging feeling remained that she was failing to avert it because Lyra, the woman, had not survived whatever process had transformed Bob's body into hers. Realizing she couldn't address her changes immediately, she decided to focus on practical matters. First, she needed clothes and a name. Bobby seemed like the obvious choice, but a fleeting thought, perhaps a memory of the original person, led her to settle on Sophie as a more modern equivalent. Getting up, she rummaged through her clothing to see if anything could be adapted for her outing. She put on a clean vest and underwear first. The pants looked a bit strange on her, but she wasn't about to go out without anything underneath. She spotted a sweatshirt that, although baggy, didn't seem too out of place. A pair of shorts was the only other item that fit. With a drawstring, it could be tightened around her narrow waist. A pair of leather sandals completed her outfit, with the buckles fastened to the last notch. Taking a deep breath, she returned to the car, feeling nervous as she prepared to pass herself off as a woman. This time, there was no adrenaline or panic to cloud her awareness of being in a woman's body, as there had been during her escape from the museum. Instead, this was a calm, deliberate portrayal of someone she had no prior experience emulating. It was intimidating, and she glanced around nervously to see if she was drawing any attention as she got into her car. As she drove into town, she had to stop for gas. The attendant at the pumps was staring at her, and it was a look she recognized well, one she had given to many pretty girls in the past. It felt uncomfortable, the way he mentally undressed her, and she found it embarrassing. On the bright side, it was clear she passed as a woman with flying colors. Eventually, she stopped near the town center and was trying to maneuver her car into a tight parking spot when a man walking by started directing her with hand signals to guide her in. This new experience left her feeling conflicted. As she stepped out of the car to thank the man, who was smiling, she considered whether he thought she needed help because she was female or if he was genuinely trying to assist her. She wondered if he would have offered the same help had she been a man in the same situation. Pushing those thoughts aside, Sophie walked toward the mall, curious about what awaited her. Upon entering, she spotted a group approaching her, one of whom was holding a video camera with the letters WMTV printed on the side. She froze, fearing they somehow knew her true identity and what had happened at the museum. Just as she was about to turn and flee, she noticed one of the men held a large jar filled with envelopes, which piqued her curiosity, prompting her to wait until they were closer. Welcome! As a visitor to the mall today, you have the chance to win a prize by selecting a lucky envelope from this jar. This promotion guarantees that everyone will win. Could you please share a little about yourself and why you chose to shop here? He said, thrusting the microphone toward her. I don't know what to say, Sophie stammered, taken by surprise. How about your name? He chuckled. That's always a good start. Sophie. Well, Sophie, he continued, can you tell us what you plan to buy here? Sophie worried about being ridiculed if her photo aired and her true identity was discovered. Knowing that walking away would draw more attention, she decided to go along with it. Clothes, I guess, Sophie replied, thinking quickly. The man laughed good-naturedly. Of course. I should have known a beautiful lady like you would be shopping for clothes. Sophie felt a blush rise. Even dressed as she was, she realized she was beautiful. This was the hardest part of becoming female, interacting with others under a new set of rules that she didn't fully understand. The physical aspects were comparatively easier to handle. She still had 2 legs and 2 arms, only certain parts were different. Realizing she needed to respond, she mentioned that she needed a whole new wardrobe because she had lost a lot of weight. The man asked how often she shopped there and how much she typically spent. Sophie blushed again, admitting it was her first time in the mall and that she usually spent around $400 when shopping, inventing some details about herself on the fly. The man thanked her and held out the jar for her to select an envelope. Upon opening it, she discovered a voucher for half off any beauty treatment at any establishment in the mall. Oh great, just what I need right now, not, Sophie thought to herself. Isn't learning how to buy women's clothes enough without that? Thanking him before he could ask more questions, she hurried into the sanctuary of a lingerie shop. She chuckled to herself, realizing that only a few hours earlier, she, as Bob, would have never had the courage to step inside. Now, she was using that same fear that most men had against them. As she surveyed the shop, Sophie realized she would need much more money than she had anticipated. The prices of women's clothes were shocking. Checking to ensure the coast was clear, she ventured out to find an ATM. Once located, she inserted her card, unaware of the spark that jumped from her fingers to the card, and entered her PIN, contemplating how much to withdraw. Checking her balance first, she was shocked to see that it had inexplicably doubled. Seizing this unexpected windfall, she withdrew nearly $2,000. She chose a store with a fine selection of women's clothing and entered, asking an assistant for advice on building a complete wardrobe. Do you want help picking out the right sizes? The assistant asked kindly. Yes, please. I need everything from the skin out, head to toe, Sophie replied, looking at her earnestly. I expect to spend a lot of money here, she added. The assistant told her to wait a moment, then walked over to an older woman who appeared to be the manager. As they spoke, the woman glanced at Sophie and smiled. After a brief conversation, she continued into an office. The assistant returned with a broad smile, informing Sophie that she could have as much time as she needed for help, even in other stores if necessary. This was excellent news for Sophie, who desperately needed assistance. The rest of the morning turned into a strange experience as Heather, the assistant, took almost full control, guiding her through selections of not just clothes, but also makeup and accessories. Most of which Sophie considered unnecessary. She simply wanted to look presentable. She didn't want her body to draw more attention, especially from men, but she couldn't find a valid excuse to refuse. Valuing Heather's expertise in this area, she hesitated to turn down her suggestions. It seemed like they had tried on everything in the store and the shoe shop next door. After hearing about the half-off offer, Heather suggested a trip to the mall's salon. After a few nudges from Heather, Sophie finally agreed to have the full treatment done. She opted for a practical perm that only needed a few strokes with a brush to maintain, yet it made her look incredibly attractive. While her hair was being styled, she also had her nails done and her ears pierced. Since her ears didn't bleed at all, she decided on small hoops instead of the usual studs. Another stylist applied her makeup, commenting that she hardly needed any, except for a bit of eyeshadow. When Sophie looked in the mirror afterward, the combination of her new clothes, makeup, and hair made her feel quite disoriented. In the reflection, she saw an image straight out of her dreams, a stunning woman with a body to die for. Yet, her mind was still that of Bob's, a male perspective that was now at odds with the beautiful woman in the mirror. This male mindset was attracted to the woman before her, wishing to kiss and know her more intimately. Unfortunately, the sexual orientation of her new body was firmly heterosexual, leaving Sophie unable to respond to her own image in a sexual way. This discrepancy worried her. Would she find men attractive? For now, she was too preoccupied with simply surviving her first day as a woman to dwell on those thoughts. As she walked out of the salon, she thanked Heather again and treated her to lunch at one of the little bistros in the mall. Sophie noticed heads turning as she entered. While she tried not to feel like a piece of meat on display, it felt as if the men's gazes were boring into her. Her lunch was hurried, the attention from the men stealing most of her appetite. She couldn't help but wonder if she, as Bob, had ever made women feel the way she did now when admiring particularly attractive females. After lunch, Heather helped her carry the bags of purchases to the car. Sophie promised to come back, and Heather hugged her and gave her a kiss on the cheek. Surprised by this display of affection, Sophie smiled back as Heather waved goodbye, realizing that women didn't hesitate to express their feelings in public. Once home, Sophie unloaded the 6 bags filled with feminine clothes and other items. She spent the rest of the afternoon organizing her new wardrobe, making space in her closets. The underwear found its way into the newly emptied drawers, while the makeup products stayed in their boxes on the dresser, as she didn't plan on using them anytime soon, if she even knew how. Other feminine hygiene and hair care products went into the bathroom along with moisturizers. Looking at the shoes she had bought, she swapped her heels for a comfortable pair of mules. While rummaging through the cupboards for something to eat, she realized she needed to go grocery shopping the next day. Finding enough for dinner, she sat down and ate in front of the TV. During a news segment featuring the mall, she caught sight of herself on screen and was struck by how feminine she appeared, even in Bob's mismatched clothes. She also noticed that her gestures and movements had become more feminine, with no sign of the anxious male she used to be. Is this part of living in a female body, she wondered, or is there another factor at play that I'm not considering? She shrugged off these thoughts as unresolvable for now and started getting ready for bed. The effects of her first full day as a woman, combined with an exhausting shopping spree, were taking their toll. As she looked at some of the nightwear she had bought, Sophie felt a slight cringe. The pieces were so delicate and feminine, considering that Bob usually slept in the nude. She questioned why she had let herself be talked into buying them. She put them back in the drawer, deciding to stick to her usual sleep attire, and crawled under the sheets, soon falling fast asleep. Her dreams were unusually vivid, filled with images of pyramids and Lyra. When the scene shifted to present-day moments, she saw herself as Sophie, not Bob. Waking once during the night to use the bathroom, she moved through the motions on autopilot, pulling up her nightgown and sitting down before returning sleepily to bed. The next morning, Sophie yawned and stretched her arms before sitting up, realizing she was still wearing the nightgown. How did that happen, she wondered. She couldn't recall putting it on, and as she glanced at the drawers, she noticed a few items out of place. Sliding out of bed, she became acutely aware of how the silky fabric felt against her body. A slight arousal surged as the sensuous material brushed against her skin, prompting her to examine her dresser more closely, curious about what seemed different. Oh my God, she thought. The makeup. Where the bottles, tubes, and other items she had purchased had previously been sealed in their assorted boxes and wrappers, they were now open. Upon inspection, she noticed that not only had someone opened them, but they had also been used. The foundation container had fingerprints in it, and the lipstick was smeared at the tip. In a panic, she rushed through her apartment, searching for an intruder. Not finding anyone and seeing that the doors were still locked, she sat down, wondering if she was dreaming. A growing suspicion led her back to the bedroom, where she dipped her finger into the foundation. Shit. She sat back on her bed, stunned. It was a perfect match. Somehow, in the middle of the night, she had opened the makeup and used it, along with putting on the nightie. I'm losing it, she thought. Something strange is happening to me. Besides the body change, now I'm sleep dressing, or whatever. She struggled to find the right word, but came up empty. Looking closely, she noticed traces of eyeshadow still on her lids. What on earth happened last night? Sophie wondered with a shiver. She decided to toss the makeup, thinking that without it, perhaps the chance of sleepwalking might decrease. But as she reached for the bottles, a voice seemed to shout, "No!" Startled, she froze, her hand hovering over the items. Slowly, she moved her hand forward again, and once more, that faint, plaintive cry echoed, "And oh, please." Sophie feared this was the end. Was she losing her mind? Hearing voices in her head felt like the last straw. Wasn't being transformed by an alien device enough? She sat quietly, anxious about any further signs of insanity. As she sat in a near-meditative state, she sensed a struggle within her mind, as if someone or something was attempting to communicate with her. Then, like a radio hitting the right frequency, the voice began to clarify with each passing second. "I am Lyra, speaking to you through this body I recreated when you entered my Hevrek capsule. I apologize for your previous male form, but your aura was particularly attracted to the capsule's sensorium." #author's note: to clarify, Lyra's thoughts will be indicated within, and Sophie's thoughts within. Normal dialogue will use. "I don't understand," thought Sophie. "What's a Hevrek capsule, and why was what's it attracted to your sensor?" Sophie could hear the voice laugh in a soothing, feminine manner. It was a relaxed and comforting sound. "Let me simplify it for you. The Hevrek capsule contained my disembodied essence, or soul if you prefer. It had a detector searching for a specific type of person to enter its range. It was set to attract individuals with psychic or latent psychic abilities, guiding them to the capsule so I could re-enter the world." "I have psychic abilities?" Sophie thought back. "Well, they are latent now, but with my powers at your disposal, we should be able to accomplish my mission," Lyra replied. "Your mission? What powers?" "I don't understand. The reason I'm here is to save your planet. Our people share some responsibility for putting it in danger." "What danger?" Sophie echoed, sensing a wave of dread. "A massive cloud of pleolites is entering our system, what you might call a scourge. They are a plague to all forms of life, and they are headed toward your planet. They will destroy all life here in a matter of days, leaving nothing behind." Sophie gasped. "How long do we have before they arrive, and is there any way to stop them?" "Not for another month or two, based on my calculations, though it could be sooner. Time is short, and we need to prepare. There is an orb that can amplify mental processes in the brain. I need to locate it and set up a field with the help of resonators placed in the pyramids by my father." At that moment, her voice grew sad as she realized her father was long gone, yet it felt like just yesterday when she had last heard him speak. "Please go on," Sophie urged, hoping to distract her from her sorrow. "What exactly are these pleolites?" "We don't know much, only that our initial attempts at contact led to the deaths of the crews that ventured too close. However, we did manage to recover a craft left drifting after the cloud had passed. Everything aboard was dead, including the ship's helks, even the plants were lifeless." "Helks? It's similar to one of your planet's cats." "Ah, a cat," Sophie offered. "Yes, a cat. Anyway, we managed to deflect the pleolites with a special energy shield before they could cause any harm, as we are a spacefaring race." She continued, trying to set aside her thoughts of her father for the moment. "We decided to redirect them to a sparsely populated area of this galaxy where they could cause no damage, but after 4 icons, we began receiving radio waves from a point directly in their path. We established that a civilization was developing in that region as the transmissions increased beyond what is normal. Much debate ensued about whether we should assist in any way, but it wasn't until a different kind of transmission was received that we took action. We saw what you call television. It was quite shocking to see people just like us, separated by the vastness of space. We couldn't stand by and do nothing, so we created a hyperwarp craft that would make a one-way journey to your planet." "Wow! Just like a story from Star Trek," Sophie interjected. "Star Trek? Oh, I see the reference in your mind," she replied. "You're reading my mind?" thought Sophie, growing alarmed. "Only your surface thoughts. I would never invade the sanctity of your mind without your permission." The thought returned, filled with shock. Sophie pondered her situation. Here she was, in a body that wasn't her own, having a silent conversation with an alien female residing in her mind, and worrying about whether that female was reading her thoughts. It seemed absurd, and she began giggling in a distinctly feminine manner, which soon evolved into full-blown laughter. Lyra's thoughts reflected puzzlement, mixed with amusement, as Sophie's thoughts became clearer. Sheesh. Come on in anytime. My thoughts are your thoughts, she laughed, borrowing a line from a Star Trek episode. Just don't blame me if it looks like a cesspool in there, she added. Lyra's voice seemed to smile, or at least it felt that way to Sophie, as Lyra's joy at being invited to share Sophie's secrets infused her next words. Sophie. I like that name. I see you chose it because it's the closest to mine in your language. Thank you for considering this. I'm honored, and I promise to do my best to help your world, save your planet through you, and guide you through the mysteries of female life. But why did you have to transform me? Couldn't you have used my male form? Sophie asked. Unfortunately, the orb is attuned to the thought patterns of a female mind, and your psychic powers will develop more fully as a woman, which will complement mine. Anyway, back to my story. There was a slight miscalculation due to the unpredictability of warp travel and the fact that it was new technology and untested. Instead of arriving at the time we expected, with a technological presence, we ended up in your past, where we could only set up the resonators and prepare for the future. Couldn't you have just warped forward a bit? Sophie inquired, recalling a recent Star Trek episode. Unfortunately, the craft was constructed in space using a non-magnetic metal alloy, lithium phosphorite. It's the only material that works in proximity to the warp engine. However, because of its high reactivity, the moment we hit the atmosphere, the hull began degrading and couldn't withstand the stresses of escaping Earth's gravity well. So, what was the mummy, capsule? How did that work? Is your entire race this inquisitive? Lyra sighed. Oh well, let's get the questions over with, she smiled. The capsule contained my energy matrix. My physical being was converted and stored while my mind entered stasis. We still had energy from the ship to facilitate the conversion, but we knew we wouldn't have it in this time period to reconvert it. That's why I needed a physical body. The energy required for body changes and downloading my mind into yours is significantly less. I guess there was plenty of room in there, Sophie joked. Yes, it's surprising, your brain seems to have a larger capacity than ours. However, we need to retrieve the capsule to complete our transformation, Lyra added, not fully grasping the joke. You're kidding, right? We can't go back in now, not with the exit I made. What other changes do we have to go through? Sophie asked, feeling anxious. Look, this is what we'll do. Now where's that makeup? We need to dress appropriately. The woman who strolled through the museum bore little resemblance to the one who had caused so much chaos a day earlier. Elegantly made up and clad in an expensive silver sheath dress that accentuated her every curve, she walked calmly past the same guard who had chased her the day before. She strutted past as if she owned the place, with the guard's eyes glued to her backside as she moved toward the display rooms. See? I told you he wouldn't be a problem. Did his eyes pop out, or what? Sophie murmured. I'm sure something did, but I'd bet it was much lower than his eyes. Okay, now what? Sophie whispered, glancing at the newly installed door leading to the room containing the capsule. This way, to the right. I can sense it. They must have moved it since you were last here. Following Lyra's guidance, Sophie walked down the right corridor until Lyra instructed her to stop outside another door. She checked to see if the coast was clear, then grasped the handle and twisted. The strength from her newfound abilities barely showed on her face, but the handle groaned and a metallic grinding sound indicated that the lock had given way. Opening the door as if it had been unlocked, Sophie stepped in confidently, barely pausing as she spotted the capsule lying on a table. She approached and placed her hand on the lid. Lyra concentrated, tapping into Sophie's untrained psychic energy. She initiated the process of Zendo, causing the capsule to shrink rapidly until it was only 6 inches long and as thick as a walking stick. The process continued, astonishing Sophie as the ends curved inward until they met and fused into a circle only 2 inches in diameter. Pulling out a leather thong, Lyra tied it through the circle, creating a necklace. She then slipped it over her head, letting the transformed capsule rest between her breasts and out of sight. Just then, a shout alerted her to the presence of a staff member entering from an adjoining room. "Hey! What are you doing in here? This is a restricted area," he shouted. "Oh. Sorry, I just wandered in since the door was unlocked." "I didn't see any signs on it," Sophie replied calmly. Scowling, the man approached the door to inspect it closely. When he saw that the handle turned easily, he was about to let her off with a warning, but then he noticed the 2 sliding bolts that were now bent and broken. He glanced around the room for any potential intruder who might have had the strength to cause such damage. Seeing no one and dismissing Sophie's apparent frailty, he quickly called in on his walkie-talkie. "Intruder alert in room Alpha B," he reported. A crackle of static preceded a voice responding, "Help is on the way, anything missing?" "I haven't checked yet, but there's a female here that needs questioning. I found her in the room." "Is she our intruder? Are you in any danger?" "No, I don't think so," the man replied, his gaze lingering on Sophie. "I think I'm in danger, though, in danger of falling in love," he laughed. The room quickly filled with burly guards and more museum staff, all eager to know what was going on. Sophie maintained her composure as questions bombarded her. "How did you get in? What were you doing in here? Was there someone else with you? Are you an accomplice?" As the staff realized the mummy case was missing, the questions took a more aggressive tone until Sophie shouted, "Enough already. I told you I haven't seen it or taken it. Does it look like I could have broken in here and removed a mummy case or whatever it is you're looking for?" she said indignantly. "Ask the guard at the door. I'm sure he noted when I entered." She glared at them, feeling justifiably outraged at being falsely accused. One of the more perceptive staff members called for the guard to join them, and the room quieted until he arrived. He confirmed that she had indeed entered alone just about 5 minutes prior. The staff members who had accused her apologized, explaining it was all a misunderstanding given the situation of finding her in the restricted area. One of the guards escorted her outside, explaining that the museum would be closed for a thorough search. As Sophie walked, she felt the miniaturized capsule behaving oddly. It pressed firmly against her as she moved and resisted changes in direction, pushing into her breasts whenever she turned. She asked Lyra about it, who laughed. "When I compressed its spatial dimensions and apparent weight, I couldn't reduce its mass. It retains the same inertia as its original weight. It's slow to start moving and just as slow to change direction or stop. I can bend some physical laws, but I can't break them," Lyra explained patiently. Back at home, Sophie removed the capsule from around her neck and set it on the floor of the living room. Using Sophie's hands, Lyra returned it to its original mummy case form. "What type of electrical energy do you use, direct current or alternating?" "Alternating," Sophie replied. Following Lyra's instructions, Sophie fiddled with the lid, removing a section with a sliding, twisting motion. This revealed a fine coil of filament-like wire, which she proceeded to insert into a power outlet after pressing on certain protrusions. Immediately, a soft hum resonated, and several small pin-like lights glowed on the mummy's lid. Sophie headed to the kitchen to grab something to eat while the capsule absorbed energy. After an hour, she noticed more lights on the lid, some blinking in a hypnotic pattern. A mental query to Lyra provided more information than she had anticipated, as Lyra informed her that they needed to return inside the capsule for the final adjustments. "But why?" Sophie asked, feeling anxious. "This body is strong, but its bones are not. We need to reinforce them and add a few features that the capsule couldn't provide with its stored power." Reluctantly, Sophie climbed into the open capsule, following Lyra's guidance to close the lid. Lyra emerged from her capsule in the late afternoon. She stretched her arms and assessed her new body, finding it as limber as her previous one. She began her yoga-style exercises, feeling the body's hunger calling her to the kitchen to prepare something nourishing. Taking her meal into the living room with a strong cup of coffee, she relaxed, enjoying the solitude of this body without Sophie's constant questions. After thoroughly enjoying a meal prepared with her own hands, she sighed. "Come on, sleepyhead, time to wake up." "Ugh. What's going on?" "My head and body ache," Sophie groaned. "What do you expect when most of the calcium in your bones has been augmented with molybdenum?" "Moly what?" "Don't worry, it's not as bad as it sounds. It makes your bones as strong as steel without adding extra weight, and it won't show up on an X-ray if you're concerned," Lyra reassured her. "So what else has changed?" asked a slightly more relaxed Sophie. "Well, our flesh is denser, allowing it to withstand much more punishment, and we are significantly faster in both speed and reflexes." "Wow, a female Superman," Sophie laughed. "Almost. Anything else?" Sophie pressed, sensing that Lyra was withholding something. "Yes, but it's something only I can access at this time. Now, let's grab a few items before we dispose of the capsule." "We're getting rid of it? Won't we need it again?" Sophie exclaimed, surprised. "No, but there are a few items we may find useful." Under Lyra's guidance, Sophie slid and pressed certain spots on the lid, revealing a small recess containing a silver disc on a necklace and a ring with a clear crystal that caught the light, producing a rainbow-like flash. When she placed the ring on her finger and the necklace around her neck, a curious tingle coursed through her body, and she felt something calling to her. "What is this feeling I'm getting? It seems to be beckoning me," she asked, startled. "That's the orb. We need to find it, and those devices amplify its signal so your mind can sense its location." "Is it in Egypt?" "If so, we're going to need a lot of money," Sophie inquired. "Money? You don't have enough?" "No, and given how I look now, I don't have a job either," Sophie sighed. "It's a nice body and it's starting to grow on me, but I can't just go to work and say I was turned into a woman by an alien artifact. I'd end up locked away, and that's the last thing we need with Earth in danger." "All right, what types of credit systems do you use?" Sophie retrieved her old wallet, which contained her credit cards and driver's license, all bearing the name Bob Sinclair. "Oh no! We can't travel overseas with that," she thought, more to herself than to Lyra. "Place the document in the capsule along with anything else that has your old name on it. We can correct them and send that information to the appropriate places electronically." Lyra instructed Sophie to plug a fine wire into her phone jack. After a flurry of flashing lights indicated that the capsule was interfacing with the network, all the necessary information was transmitted to banks and government agencies so that her new identity would withstand scrutiny. After removing her cards, driver's license, and passport, Sophie saw that they now displayed the name Sophie Sinclair. Even the photos had been updated with her new image. "I've augmented your monetary accounts. I hope 3 million of your currency will suffice." 3 million. "Oh my God, I'll be arrested for fraud." Sophie gasped. "Wait a minute, it was you who altered my account balance at the mall, wasn't it?" "Yes, I sensed that you needed more funds and modified the card to double whatever you had." "Where did we get $3 million from?" "Don't worry, it's been obtained through untraceable means and won't attract any attention from the authorities. I transferred $1 out of 3 million accounts disguised as normal bank charges." The woman waiting quietly for her boarding pass on the direct flight to Cairo exuded calm elegance, though no one could imagine the turmoil churning in her mind. Dressed in a navy skirt suit and matching heels, she fiddled nervously with the ruffles of her cream blouse. "Are you sure I look okay?" Sophie asked, anxiety creeping into her voice. "With this body? You'd look great in a sack," Lyra sighed, wondering how many more times she would need to reassure her. "I hope that passport holds up, otherwise, we could end up in prison for a very long time." Calm down and enjoy the flight. We'll be very busy later, and I need you in a relaxed state, not burning energy needlessly.